She stood in the middle of a rain-slicked street, soaked to the bone, clutching her child like he was the last thing in the world that still belonged to her. One desperate request, a ride just a few blocks, was all she asked. He was a millionaire CEO with a broken past and a heart locked behind boardroom walls. He should have said no. Instead, he opened the door. Neither of them knew that moment would change everything. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Rain battered the city like a chorus of whispered grief, each drop a memory crashing onto the pavement. The wind screamed through the empty streets, lifting broken branches and sending them tumbling across the slick asphalt. Street lights flickered like ghosts, their glow refracted in puddles that shimmered with the weight of the night. Inside a sleek black town car, Daniel sat alone in the back seat, his silhouette half-draped in shadows. The leather interior, smooth, scentless, expensive, might have comforted another man. But not Daniel. He stared blankly out the window, watching rivulets of rain chase each other down the glass, as if even they were running from something. His phone buzzed once on the seat beside him, screen lighting up with a name he couldn't bear to see. He didn't look. He didn't need to. He already knew the text would be another reminder. A board member demanding answers, a lawyer chasing signatures, or maybe just another echo from the ruins of his life. His temples throbbed. The day had drained him. Meetings where voices clashed over lost revenue and fragile futures, where colleagues' loyalty vanished like steam. A company he built with precision and pride was now on the verge of collapse. And yet none of it hurt as much as the silence waiting for him at home. He closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. But even behind his lids, the storm followed. Flashes of her face, of laughter lost to time. He clenched his jaw, fingers pressing into the bridge of his nose. No tears. Not tonight. A sudden jolt broke his trance. The car slowed sharply. Daniel opened his eyes, irritation surfacing in his voice. What is it? The driver leaned forward, squinting through the streaked windshield. There's someone in the road, he said, pointing. Daniel leaned forward, brows furrowed. In the blur of the rain, a figure materialized, fragile, almost spectral. A woman stood in the middle of the street, soaked to the bone, her clothes clinging to her as if trying to keep her from disappearing. Clutched tightly against her chest was a small child, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that had long since given up against the storm. The woman wasn't moving. She looked straight at the car, lips parting as she tried to speak. The child in her arms shivered, its head pressed into the hollow of her neck. The driver cracked the window. "Ma'am," he said, voice cautious but firm. "You need to move. This is dangerous." Her voice broke through the rain, trembling. "Please. I just need a ride. Just a few blocks. My baby, he's cold. We don't have anywhere to go." Daniel said nothing. He watched, studied, measured. Her desperation was etched into every shiver of her frame, every syllable that quivered with fear. Her eyes flicked to his, just for a moment. There was something in them. Not just fear. Something fierce. Something maternal. Something human. The driver hesitated, then shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We can't help you. It's not safe." The woman's shoulders sagged. Her eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat before she turned away, adjusting the blanket around her child and stepping back into the darkness. Then Daniel reached for the door handle. The click of the lock echoed louder than thunder. The soft metallic click of the rear door unlocking sliced clean through the rhythm of the rain, catching the woman mid-step. She froze. Her hand tightened around the child, as if she hadn't heard it right, or didn't believe she had. "Get in," Daniel said from the shadows of the back seat. His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried a gravity that turned the moment solemn. It was the voice of someone used to command, but weary of using it. The woman turned slowly, blinking through the rain. Her hair, soaked and matted to her forehead, framed a face drawn tight with disbelief and fear. "What?" she said, not moving. Daniel didn't repeat himself at first. He simply looked at her, eyes steady, unreadable. Then, gently but firmly, I said, "Get in." There was a pause. Not hesitation exactly, more like the breath between survival and surrender. She glanced at the driver, who kept his eyes trained forward, hands locked at 10, and two like the steering wheel had become an anchor in unfamiliar waters. No protest this time. Just silence. Cradling her child tighter, she opened the rear door and slid inside, careful not to drip too much onto the immaculate leather. Her movements were small, guarded, like someone trying not to take up too much space in a room they weren't sure they belonged in. The child let out a soft, pitiful whimper as she sat. She adjusted him quickly, whispering something soothing into his damp hair. Her own clothes clung to her like a second skin, shivering from more than just the cold. The driver gave a glance to the rearview mirror, raising an eyebrow toward Daniel, who didn't return it. He simply said, "Drive." The car moved again, the tires slicing through puddles like blades through silk. Inside, the cabin was tense. Silent. Rain drummed against the roof like 100 tiny fists. The car's heater hummed softly, but it wasn't enough to erase the chill. Daniel stared out the window, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her, not yet. He was still sorting the dissonance in his head, the contrast of her bare desperation and the 1,000 reasons he had to keep driving, to keep detached, to keep his world clean and contained. But he'd opened the door anyway. "Thank you," she whispered after a few moments. Her voice was brittle, thin. She spoke like someone unused to gratitude being received. He gave the smallest nod without turning. "Where are you headed?" She exhaled, her breath catching somewhere between her ribs. "Just anywhere safe," she said. "I don't have a place right now." He finally looked over. The first real look. In the dim interior light, her face was clearer now. Hollow cheeks, eyes dark with exhaustion, lips pale from cold. But beneath it all, there was a fire, a stubborn light, faint but unyielding. The child in her arms had quieted, small chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm, clinging to her with the instinct of someone who knew she was the only warmth in the world. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The storm outside was still raging, but in the cocoon of the car, something else was stirring, an unspoken shift. A silent pact between strangers colliding in the void between despair and decision. He reached forward and pressed a button on the console. "Turn up the heat," he said to the driver. Then, almost as an afterthought, "and take the long way." Outside, the storm swallowed the streets. Inside, the ride had just begun. The car slipped through the city like a shadow, gliding past shuttered storefronts and darkened homes. Streetlights blurred against the wet windows, bleeding gold and white into ribbons of color that passed over the faces in the back seat like flickering memories. Inside, the silence had changed. It wasn't the awkward kind that fills empty elevators or waiting rooms. It was heavier, denser. The kind of silence that comes after years of noise. Screams. Doors slamming. Things breaking. Hearts breaking. Daniel leaned back in his seat, watching the world pass by but seeing none of it. His reflection stared at him from the window, older than he remembered, more tired than he admitted. The sharp lines of his jaw, the graying stubble, the way his eyes had grown used to looking but not seeing. Next to him, the woman adjusted her grip on the child. She winced slightly, just a flicker. But Daniel noticed. He turned his head, just enough to glance at her profile. Her coat had pulled back from her wrist. The skin beneath was mottled with shadows, faint bruises, yellowing at the edges, too deliberate to be clumsy accidents. There were more along the curve of her arm, barely hidden beneath the fabric. Old pain. Recent pain. She noticed him looking. Instinctively, she pulled the coat tighter, her posture curling inward like a flame shielding itself from the wind. Her eyes didn't meet his. They stared forward, focused on nothing. Daniel didn't ask. Not yet. But something inside him stirred. Not pity. Something sharper. Angrier. The heater hummed louder now, filling the car with warmth the way dawn slowly edges out the cold. The child stirred, his head rolling onto her shoulder with a soft sigh. She held him tighter, resting her cheek against his curls. Her eyes, red-rimmed and brittle, softened for just a moment as she watched him sleep. "I wasn't going to let him hit my son," she said quietly. Daniel blinked. The sentence had landed like a stone dropped into still water. No warning, no build-up, just the truth. She didn't look at him, still staring ahead, like she was speaking to the night outside the windshield. "He was okay hitting me. Always careful, though. No broken bones. Nothing that would make a nurse ask questions." Her voice was too even, too practiced. "But when he started grabbing my boy, just his arm, not hard at first, but I knew it was coming." The car's interior felt smaller now. Closer. "I left while he was at work. Took a grocery bag and the diaper bag. That's all I could carry." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Didn't even take shoes for myself. Just his." Daniel looked down at her feet. Her sneakers were frayed and 2 sizes too big. The soles had peeled halfway off. "I've been walking all day," she added. "Just trying to keep moving. Places look at you different when you're carrying a kid with no address." Still, she didn't cry. There was a steel in her voice, not polished, not proud. Just real. Daniel nodded, barely, then looked away again. He didn't speak about his own past. Not tonight. But the bruises she wore on her skin mirrored the ones he carried in silence. Losses that hadn't left marks, but had never healed. The car slowed at a red light. The windshield wipers paused for a breath. Outside, the world was still drenched and waiting. Inside, the air was warmer, and something unspoken passed between them. Not understanding, not yet, but recognition. Of pain, of defiance, of the way people learn to live with ghosts. The light turned green. They kept driving. The car coasted to a gentle stop in front of a corner diner. An old place with fogged-up windows and a neon sign that buzzed like it was too tired to keep pretending it still belonged in the city. The red glow from the word "open" spilled onto the rain-slick sidewalk, casting the entrance in an eerie, inviting glow. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He simply opened the door and stepped out, the rain having slowed to a steady whisper. The woman hesitated, her arms wrapped tightly around her child, her soaked sleeves clinging to them both like a second skin. "You hungry?" Daniel asked, already halfway to the door. She blinked at him, unsure if it was a real offer or some kind of test. Her stomach, long since empty, twisted sharply in response. The child stirred against her, tiny fists curling and uncurling like he was dreaming of warmth. She got out. The bell above the door jingled softly as they entered, greeted by a wave of butter and burnt coffee. Smells that had no right to be comforting, and yet somehow were. The heat inside clung to their skin, soaking into their bones. The woman exhaled, and it came out shaky. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been until it started to fade. A waitress behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that read Gloria, looked up, gave them a once-over, then smiled faintly. "Sit anywhere," she said, her voice gravelly but kind. "I'll be right with you." They slid into a booth near the back, under a window streaked with rain. Daniel sat across from her, removing his coat but leaving his tie on, his sleeves still perfectly creased. She settled in slowly, cautiously. Her child curled into her side, head resting in her lap now, finally still. She ran her fingers through his hair, tangled, wet, and soft, her touch gentle, rhythmic. A lullaby without a tune. The menus lay untouched on the table. "I don't have any money," she said quietly, eyes downcast, as if ashamed of the obvious. Daniel looked up from his own thoughts, his gaze steady but not sharp. "I didn't ask you to pay," he said simply. She nodded once, slowly. There was dignity in her silence, even as her pride bristled. She hadn't asked for this. Any of this. But right now, her child needed something more than survival. He needed a moment of normal. When Gloria returned, she didn't ask questions. She looked at the woman, then at the child, then at Daniel, and simply said, "You want me to bring something for the little one first?" "Soup," Daniel said. "Something warm. And soft bread, if you have it." Gloria nodded and disappeared behind the counter. They sat in silence for a few moments, surrounded by the clink of cutlery, the murmur of late-night conversations, and the low croon of a radio playing old Motown. The child stirred as the food arrived, his eyes fluttering open, bleary but curious. Gloria laid down a steaming bowl of soup and a small plate of fresh, buttered bread. The woman reached for the spoon, but the boy was already sitting up, reaching eagerly with tiny fingers. "Slow," she murmured, blowing gently on the soup before feeding him the first spoonful. The boy's face lit up just slightly, and a small sound escaped his mouth, half sigh, half laugh. Daniel watched them, not like a man intruding, but like someone observing something rare, something fragile. "What's his name?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then spoke without looking up. "Micah." Daniel nodded. "Strong name." "He's stronger than I am," she replied, brushing a bit of soup from Micah's chin. A silence passed, not empty but full, heavy with things that didn't need saying. Gloria returned with more food, placing a plate of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans in front of each of them. The woman blinked. "This is too much." "You walked all day in the rain," Daniel said. "Eat." She looked at him then, really looked, searching his face for judgment, for conditions, for some trace of the world she knew. But there was none, just quiet tiredness. And something else, something raw. She picked up her fork. They ate slowly, carefully. Micah nodded off again after his soup, sliding down into his mother's lap like a satisfied kitten. She stroked his hair again, this time without fear clouding the motion. Halfway through the meal, she looked up at Daniel and said, "You didn't have to stop." "I know. Most people wouldn't." He looked at her then, and something flickered in his expression, regret maybe, or memory. "I'm not most people," he said. She believed him. The rain outside began to let up. Inside, for the first time in what felt like years, warmth didn't feel temporary. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time they stepped back outside. The air was damp and cold, the kind of cold that clings more than bites. The city looked quieter now, less like a threat, more like a backdrop exhaling after a long storm. Daniel opened the rear door of the car again, gesturing for her to get in. She moved carefully, Micah in her arms, his head nestled into the curve of her shoulder. He was sleeping soundly, stomach full, the way only a child who has been truly hungry can sleep after a meal. They didn't speak much during the ride. Words had done their work for now. Outside the window, buildings gave way to trees, concrete to quiet. The city faded behind them, swallowed by the night, until only darkness and dim porch lights lined the roadside. Eventually, the car turned onto a long, private drive. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Tall hedges rose on either side like sentinels. At the end of the path stood a house. No, an estate. Pale stone, clean lines, windows like eyes watching from the dark. The kind of house that carried silence like furniture. As the car rolled to a stop, the woman stared at the home with cautious awe. It looked more like a museum than a place someone lived. Large. Immaculate. Lonely. Daniel stepped out first. The motion sensor lights clicked on above the front steps, casting long shadows across the driveway. He turned back and held the door for her. She didn't move right away. "This is yours," she asked quietly. He didn't answer directly. "You can stay in the guest house," he said instead, gesturing past the hedges. "It's separate from the main place. Quiet. Private." She hesitated. Instinct again. The same one that made her check over her shoulder, even when she knew no one was following. The one that whispered things can be taken just as quickly as they're given. But then she looked down at Micah, still fast asleep, his face soft and calm for the first time in days. She got out. He led her down a narrow path behind the house, where a smaller cottage stood beneath a towering oak. The guest house was simple but elegant, shuttered windows, a stone stoop, ivy creeping up one wall. A warm light flicked on inside as Daniel keyed in a code at the door. The lock clicked open. Inside, it was quiet, clean. The heat was already on. A small living room opened into a kitchenette. A hallway led to a bedroom, where a made-up bed stood waiting. "I'll get you some towels," Daniel said. "There's food in the fridge. Clothes in the closet. Maybe not your size, but they'll do until morning. She stepped slowly into the room, her eyes scanning every corner. Not out of suspicion, out of disbelief. The wallpaper was soft gray. A framed photograph of a sailboat hung above the mantel. Nothing flashy. Just safe. She laid Micah gently on the bed, pulling the blanket over him. He didn't stir. Daniel returned with a stack of folded towels and placed them on a chair by the door. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "As long as you need, we'll figure it out." She looked at him then, really looked. The kind of look that has no language. Not gratitude. Not trust. Something more cautious. More vulnerable. He didn't flinch. "There's a camera by the front gate," he added, almost as an afterthought. "Just so you know, no one gets in unless I let them." She nodded slowly. That mattered more than he probably realized. Daniel turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I'll come by in the morning. Bring breakfast." She didn't respond right away. She was staring at the picture on the wall now. The sailboat, quiet on the water, untouched by wind or storm. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He exhaled, hand resting on the doorframe. "Because I know what it's like to lose something and not know where to go." Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him. She stood there a long moment in the silence, the walls holding a kind of stillness she hadn't felt in years. No footsteps. No yelling. No glass breaking in the next room. Just the hum of the heater. The soft breathing of her child. She peeled off her soaked clothes and wrapped herself in one of the towels. In the bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection. The bruises, the hollow eyes, the sharpness of her collarbones. She looked like a woman who'd forgotten how to rest. Back in the bedroom, she lay beside Micah, one arm draped across his back like a shield, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She didn't sleep right away. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't stay awake out of fear. Morning arrived softly. It wasn't the kind of sunrise that poured gold over the horizon. It came gently, almost apologetically, muted light slipping between the blinds of the guest house, like it knew not to come too loud. The storm had passed, but the world outside was still wet, dew clinging to every leaf, the soil still breathing in yesterday's rain. She awoke before Micah did. For a long time, she didn't move. Her body ached, not from sleep, but from remembering how it felt to rest. Muscles long trained to stay tense were now unraveling, slowly, reluctantly. Her eyes traced the ceiling, the stillness around her unsettling in its gentleness. She rose quietly and padded into the kitchen, pulling one of the oversized sweatshirts from the closet over her frame. It hung off her shoulders like borrowed armor, soft and unfamiliar. There was coffee already brewing. She paused. That hadn't been there last night. The front door had been locked. She was sure of it. Still, there it was, coffee in the pot, 2 fresh mugs on the counter, and a bag of groceries neatly placed on the kitchen table. Fruit, cereal, eggs, milk, even a small toy dinosaur perched beside a box of juice. She stared at it like it was a trap, like she might touch it and it would vanish. Then, slowly, she reached out and picked up the mug. Across the garden, the main house sat quiet and still, shrouded by tall trees and old silence. Its windows were shut, its walls tall and clean. From the outside, it looked like it had been untouched by grief. But grief isn't always loud. Daniel stood by the upstairs window, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, a glass of water in his hand, untouched. He watched the guest house without watching her, not wanting to impose. Not yet. The coffee delivery had been early, a quiet offering. He hadn't expected her to see him. And she didn't. But he saw her. And in her tentative movements, cautious, alert, protective, he saw something he recognized. Lost leaves fingerprints. They were all over his life. He hadn't been back in that guest house since Claire died. Claire, his wife, his partner in everything that once mattered. The woman with fire in her laugh and a plan for every room of this too-big house. The guest house had been her idea, for visitors, she'd said. Or maybe your mother, if she ever decides to forgive you. He'd laughed. She always found ways to bring light into things he would have left in shadow. But after the accident, He couldn't bring himself to unlock that door again. The guest house became a mausoleum of intentions. Until last night. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 8. Daniel blinked and stepped away from the window. By mid-morning, he crossed the lawn with a tray of breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, orange slices, and more coffee. It felt strange, this ritual. Intimate in a way that made him ache. She opened the door before he knocked. She was dressed now, hair pulled back, eyes still cautious but no longer guarded. Micah stood behind her, clutching the toy dinosaur from the counter. "You made coffee," she said. "You looked like someone who needed it," Daniel replied. She let him in. No ceremony. Just a quiet gesture, as if something had shifted overnight. Not trust, but something close enough. He set the tray on the table. Micah climbed into the chair without prompting, attacking the toast like it owed him something. Daniel looked around the space. "You slept." She nodded. "More than I meant to." He didn't press further. She sat across from him, her hands cupped around the mug. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just the clink of a spoon against ceramic, the soft murmur of a child's chewing. "I used to think," she said finally, "that the worst part of leaving was the fear. But it's not. It's realizing you stayed that long." Daniel didn't look at her. He looked at the mug in his hands. Then, quietly, "I stayed too long, too." She blinked, expecting a different kind of story. One about leaving a bad job, maybe, or selling a company at the wrong time. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze. His voice was measured, but it cracked at the edges. "She was everything. Claire. My wife. We fought sometimes over stupid things, paint colors, pillows, whether the dog should be allowed on the bed. But there was no storm in our house. Just life. Real loud, alive." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly, as if replaying the final scene behind his lids. "She called me that morning. I didn't answer. Too many meetings, too many people needing too many things. I thought I'd call her back in an hour. I never got the chance." The silence between them was now something sacred. "She was driving to the store," he continued. "Someone ran a red light. That was it." The woman looked down at her hands, knuckles white against the mug. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. "Not a thank you. Just acknowledgement. I kept working after she died," he said. "Tried to fix the company like I couldn't fix the rest. This house got quieter. Bigger. And the guest house. I couldn't even look at it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why now?" He looked at her. Really looked. "Because last night someone needed it." Micah giggled suddenly, crumbs on his lips. The dinosaur perched beside his plate like a breakfast companion. The woman smiled, just for a heartbeat, but it was real. Unrehearsed. Like something thawing. Daniel rose slowly, clearing his plate. "I'll be back later. There's a garden behind the guest house, if he wants to run around." She nodded, standing too. "Thank you. For all of this." He hesitated at the door. "You don't owe me anything. You're safe here. That's all." Then he stepped out into the sunlight. She watched him go, the door still ajar. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. The next few days passed like morning mist, light, slow, and almost imperceptible in their passing. Nothing dramatic happened. No declarations. No confessions. No sudden, sweeping transformations. And yet, change was everywhere. In the small garden behind the guest house, Micah discovered the soft joy of grass beneath his feet. He ran circles around the old oak tree, chasing butterflies with a plastic spoon, laughing like his lungs had never been asked to hold fear. She watched him from the porch, sipping coffee from the same mug Daniel had brought that first morning. It had become a quiet ritual now. Every sunrise, the tray appeared just before she woke, always with something thoughtful. A warm croissant, a note scribbled with directions to a local park, a book of bedtime stories tucked beside the toast. He never stayed long. Daniel would knock, 3 sharp taps, place the tray on the porch, nod if she was already awake, and disappear before the coffee had cooled. She didn't know if it was respect or hesitation. Maybe both. She didn't press. But every evening after Micah was asleep, She'd sit out back and look toward the main house. Lights would flicker on in different rooms. Sometimes music floated softly from open windows. Ella Fitzgerald, or Bill Withers, or once a mournful piano that made her eyes burn for reasons she didn't understand. And every so often, she'd see Daniel at the upstairs window, standing like a shadow behind glass. Neither of them waved. But somehow it didn't feel like distance. It felt like something waiting. One afternoon, as Micah napped and sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, there was a knock. Not Daniel's usual 3, but a single, hesitant knock. She opened the door to find him there, holding 2 plates and a bottle of lemonade. "I thought you might be sick of toast," he said. "I grilled something. Hope you're not vegetarian." "I was," she said, and then paused. "Until I stopped being picky." He smiled. She stepped aside and let him in. They ate at the small wooden table, knees nearly brushing, surrounded by quiet that didn't need filling. The food was good, simple, honest. Chicken, vegetables, lemon rice. She cleaned her plate. He did too. Afterward, they sat in the garden. Micah still slept inside. The sun was low, painting everything in gold. "I used to imagine this," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "Not the house. Not the food. Just this. Sitting somewhere without having to look at the door every few minutes. Breathing without wondering if it was the last calm before everything shattered." Daniel didn't speak. "But now that I have it," she continued, "I don't know what to do with it." He nodded. Slowly. "You don't have to do anything with it yet. Just keep breathing." A robin fluttered down onto the fence post, chirping once before flying away. The moment felt delicate, like any wrong word might send it scattering. "I forgot I was allowed to want things," she admitted, voice quieter now. "Even small things. Like books. Or clean sheets. Or a lock I control. You're allowed to want all of it," he said. "And more." She looked at him then, for the first time in full daylight. No shadows. No storm. Just 2 people sitting among vines and clover, learning how to be human again. "You make it sound simple," she said. "No," he replied. "Just worth it." That night, she read to Micah from one of the books he'd left. The boy nestled into her side, fingers still sticky from lemonade. His eyelids drooped as she turned the last page. When he finally slipped into sleep, she sat there a moment longer, staring at the cover. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened the window to the night air, let the breeze carry in the scent of honeysuckle from the garden, and whispered to the dark. "We're still here." It wasn't a victory cry. It wasn't triumph. But it was the beginning of something. A seed in warm soil. A door cracked open. Hope, still fragile, still quiet, but alive. The first real summer rain came 2 weeks later, warm, persistent, playful. Not the kind of storm that threatened, but the kind that kissed the earth in celebration. The kind children danced in. The kind that softened wounds still mending beneath the skin. Micah was in the garden again, now barefoot and fearless, shrieking with laughter as he chased droplets. His curls clung to his forehead, soaked through, and the toy dinosaur had become a makeshift boat in the puddle by the tree roots. From the kitchen window, she watched with a dish towel in her hand, smiling. It wasn't the weary smile of someone trying to stay strong. It was light, unforced, a memory of the woman she used to be, waking back up inside her. Behind her, a soft knock. She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, holding a folder and 2 cups of coffee. He was dressed down, no tie, sleeves rolled, a faint spatter of rain on his collar. "I didn't bring breakfast," he said. "But I brought something else." She raised an eyebrow and gestured to the table. "That folder better have pancakes in it." He laughed, an easy, open laugh that made him look younger for a moment. He handed her a cup, then laid the folder on the table between them. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page offer letter. A job. Office assistant, part-time to start. Flexible hours. Health benefits. Childcare stipend. Her name already typed at the top. She stared at it. "I know you're not ready to go back to everything," Daniel said quietly. "But maybe just something. Your pace. Your choice." Her hands didn't shake. "Not this time." I haven't worked since. You're ready, he said before she could finish. She looked at him. His certainty wasn't pushy. It was calm. It was belief. Outside, Micah squealed and threw his arms wide to the sky. She smiled. I'll think about it. He nodded. That's all I ask. Later that evening, when the rain had passed and the world was soaked in silver light, they walked the garden path together. Daniel, her, and Micah between them, tiny fingers clutched in each of theirs. There were no big conversations. No romantic confessions. Just the rustle of leaves, the murmur of frogs in the distance, the warmth of two hands holding a child who had already decided they belonged to him. As they reached the end of the path, Micah tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Are you rich? He asked wide-eyed. Daniel smiled down at him. A little. Micah nodded sagely. You don't act like it. She laughed, a sound that was becoming more familiar now. That's the nicest thing anyone's said to him all year. Daniel grinned, but didn't deny it. They stood there a moment longer, as the sky darkened and the air cooled, the porch light of the guest house flicking on behind them like a promise. And then, quietly, she said it. You didn't just give me a ride that night. He looked over. No. She shook her head, eyes soft. You gave me a direction. Daniel didn't speak. He just reached out, gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, and nodded. Not in agreement. In understanding. The door to the guest house clicked shut behind them as she carried Micah inside. The boy was half asleep, arms draped over her shoulder. She tucked him into bed, humming something old and off-key, then lingered at the window. Daniel was walking back across the yard, hands in his pockets, head tilted up toward the stars. She didn't call him back. She didn't have to. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A new story. One born not of tragedy, but of choice. Of healing. Of home. And it had started with a single act on a rain-slick street, when a woman with nothing left asked a stranger for a ride. And he opened the door. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.